Hi, welcome to the Nurture Pod. My name is Iris Sullivan Dare, and I'm here with my co-host, Ginger Edwards. And the Nurture Pod is where we explore that kind of riparian zone between what is and what is possible, and kind of explore how we can co-create a more benevolent world that we know is possible within our
Mm.
hearts. And this is an extra special episode because we have our very first guest, and it's somebody that does work that both of us are very excited about and have a lot of heart space for. So,
Mm.
Ginger, I would love for you to do the intro to our guest.
Yay. I'm so excited for this moment because this is bringing together like two very cool people in my life. Iris, of course, and my cousin, my first cousin, Josh Lowe. And he is a therapist and he works kind of mostly with men in grief, but he's now kind of getting into community grief stuff. And he is going to come up and do a grief ritual here on the North Coast in October, the weekend of October 13th. So, yeah, we thought we'd bring him on, first ever guest for episode 19. I was very excited. And we'll just talk about this because not everyone who sees a poster that says there's a grief ritual is going to be like, that sounds like something I want to do. But it might be something you want to do, listener. So we're going to talk about it and pull this thing apart. And so, Josh, I'm going to bring you on because you're the man who maybe can lay out why would anybody in their world want to go to a grief ritual?
Let's start with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think the first thing that I often will respond to that question with is my curiosity about how the person who's asking me that, what their kind of relationship to grief is and how they kind of define it and how does that look like in their lives. And what I often hear reflected in the culture is a fairly, in my opinion, fairly limited view of what grief is. And the way I often describe it is, for me, grief is really an integral part of being human.
Mhm.
So to be fully whole as a human, I have to be in touch and connected to my grief. We come into the world grief carriers. There's no way to escape it. Um, Part of being in life is to also be with loss. And so really that's that's kind of how I want to frame things for people, is that we can't avoid it. We can learn how to really hold it in a tender, beautiful way. And my other kind of way of trying to get people to understand why they may want to come to a grief ritual is that grief is, the way I often describe it, grief is an aspect or a version of love. So when I fall deeply in love with something, whether it's another human being or an animal or a sunset, grief comes with it because I have to let that go at some point, whether that's, visiting you, Ginger, up in your beautiful neighborhood and having this beautiful connection and then leaving. There's grief in that. And it's just because I love you and because I love the time we spent, right? And the same with a sunset, as simple as that and as beautiful as that, to fall in love with that moment is to also grieve it because it will pass. And so that's kind of my poetic way of describing grief. Um, and I'll just say this, and I'd love to hear your opinions or questions, is I think what often the culture has been conditioned to believe is grief is painful and it's just about when people die. And why would we want to, either stir that up or, look at that before it's time? And so our avoidance and our fear, in my judgment, of death is a big part of that. Yeah, so I'll stop there and take a drink of water. But what are your thoughts, guys?
Well, that was actually really beautiful. It was you touched into like yeah, like it's true. Everything in life is transitory. I've just been rereading or re-listening to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and it really he talks so much about like the only point of life there ever is in the present moment. Like there is nothing else. It's an illusion that we have anything else. And I found myself having a little almost grief around that. Like you can't hold on to anything. Like it really is just happening all the time. And there it like that, yeah, our whole experience on planet Earth, whether we want to, our minds likes to believe that there's a future and a past and like, you know, things that we can plan for and cling on to and go back to. But there really isn't. There's just now. And so, yeah, how can you, I mean, that's very true. I think maybe our obsession with like worrying about the future or being in the past is kind of avoidance of grief, you know, because we can hold on to things. Like grief is letting go. So there's a part of me that like has been really understanding the magic of letting go. And you can't, I mean, there's going to be a grief that comes with that. But I feel like without practicing that art of knowing how to let go gracefully, knowing that everything's transitory, it creates this like clinging, you know, this anxiety of like, this is all, you know, I've got this other stuff I got to hold on to. And we base our mind gets really wrapped up in those stories, and the stories become our identity, and we become, that's what our life is about. So when those stories get disrupted, it's really painful, which is, I think, why when some people would see a grief ritual, they'd be like, I don't want to go into the disruption of, you know, the ending of any of those stories. That's my identity we're talking about. These are my deepest fears of loss.
Yeah.
But if you hold everything just much lighter, then it can become this beautiful practice that you just described. Like it's almost Buddhist. Like there's nothing else. It's always just a transitory moment that we're just always grieving and loving what is, and then grieving it and letting it go and letting the next thing come. But man, that's masterful work, in my opinion. Iris, what do you think?
Sorry about the cat. Speaking of at the present moment, um, I really think there was a period in my life in which I actually did have a lot of death of people close to me for it was about a decade, and I had 10 people die in that decade that were ranged from, you know, very, anyway, it was kind of a big deal. And through that process, I just found myself like keep expanding what it is that is grief, and realizing, you know, it became really clear, you know, a couple of years in, that like it's absolutely not just about sadness or depression, right? It's like the whole gauntlet. It's like soul drenching gratitude happens, and also like and just like there's like sweetness, and there's like an expanded I figure my cat expanded expanded appreciation for the present moment, because it's such a it, and so in that way it's incredibly beautiful. So yeah, so I'm really liking your idea that it is kind of a catch and release process of experiencing something and then letting it go, and experiencing and letting it go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, you know, this has been my other thing I've been thinking a lot about, and just the culture. I've been in this kind of mindset of, you know, the joke that's very real is, you know, inviting someone to a grief ritual, especially men, it's a hard sell. It's a very hard sell. That people are not open or excited for the most part. Even those who you think would be open are often have these unconscious and conscious barriers. But I've been thinking about the culture, and you know, I think in certain pockets of our culture now, there is a gratitude understanding and a practice that a lot of people speak to, and, you know, a daily gratitude practice, which is absolutely beautiful and wonderful, and something that I fully believe in. And what I'm realizing more and more is that the other side of the coin to gratitude is grief, right? Because the things that I am most grateful for, the things I'm most afraid to lose. And so how do you actually create the practice that moves those two sides together, right? And I think, again, it's an expanding opening to what grief really truly is. And Iris, what you're saying is like, yeah, the pain is real, and it's not something that we can deny when we talk about grief, right? When we lose something we love, we can't deny the fact that it's going to cause us pain, and avoidance too, right? Resistance to that. But as we lean in, more starts to reveal itself, right? I always talk about the wisdom of grief, that when we really call it in a sacred way, that grief will give us this wisdom about being human. And one of it is, everything is so precious, right? This moment is so precious. If I can open myself to the reality that it's going to go away.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call.
No, it does make sense. And I want to just jump in that, because I think that is what our culture has such a hard time with. It's gratitude's easier because we are a culture that focuses on things, right? Like I'm grateful for this plant. I'm grateful for my house. I'm grateful for my relationship. Like that's easier. Like it's the accumulation and the gratitude's an easier practice for us to grab onto. Grief is the absence of things. And I think in capitalism and in our culture, like that's not a good thing. Like we want to fill those spaces in, we try to avoid loss and losing and sliding backwards and all these kind of cultural perceptions that it's less than it was. And I think that's why when you framed it at the very beginning of it's just like a practice of exhaling and inhaling, it's like it is two sides to the coin. You can't have one without the other. I just love that. I don't think I've thought of it that way before until now, but I think that's really beautiful. It's just like it's a way of life. Grief is a way of life. It's an integral part of being human. And so not having practices for it
right
is a real loss to our humanity.
And the practices that we have been kind of offered culturally are, not, they're not community driven, or they're very briefly community driven, right? Like a funeral. Okay, we all come together, we have this moment, we say some kind words, and then we kind of move on. But for me, like the term that's used in the grief communities, we're all grief carriers, but only some of us are grief tenders. And I think it's a beautiful analogy of, like, if you're tending a fire, right? If you really are putting love and intention into a fire, you're really watching, you're listening, you're engaging, you're welcoming the transition and the transformation as part of the process of tending the fire. And it's the same with grief, that there are times where I am feeling so much loss in the world. We're in this political just shitstorm, pardon my language, and there's so much grief, not in the political parties, but just the division that I feel in good human beings who cannot see each other's goodness because they're blinded by these political. There's so much grief in that. And to tend that is to be not in opposition to someone else's experience, but to just be into the sorrow of disconnection. And I think that, to me, is one of the simpler ways to put grief for someone who maybe has the broader, like, death is grief. But for me, it's disconnection. So if I'm disconnected from my own self-love, and we often call that shame, that's grief. Because I can't find my source of love and that respect I have for myself and the goodness. If I'm disconnected with my wife, that's grief, because there's a temporary loss of this deep, beautiful connection. And so, is that making sense?
It is.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead, Iris.
I have so I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but do you feel that the process of tending to grief is, in a way, it's like stepping out of the mundane? I feel like that I mean, I remember I've felt like it's almost like an altered state of consciousness, because I'm feeling the world in a different way when I'm fully present with grief. And that, like, I had two babies at home, and I've also tended to a friend and my grandfather while they were dying. And so I've had the privilege of being with two people coming into the world and two people leaving the world. And that time period around those events feels so exquisitely similar. Like, there's also grief and birth. I mean, like, your life is utterly changed, and it's utterly changed. And anyway, so I feel like this is a curious idea for me because this is how I've been kind of fixated on this idea that it's this like altered state that you can kind of open up to, it's almost like this veil between this mundane world where you pretend like everything is the way it seems in the society around us, and then you
Right.
are blasted out of it, in which you cannot deny the full ocean of feelings that we're all part of, and then coming back to just like, make the donuts.
Mhm.
So like
Yeah.
this idea of it being an inhale and an exhale, how do you see that? I guess like, do you see it as something separate from the mundane world, or that it's something that we need to integrate into our mundane world?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think, I think my experience with it is there is the ritual space, right? So when we do these weekends, we really call on the ritual. And I just want to bless the teachers, Malidoma Some, Sabanfu Some, who really brought this to our culture and realized, oh, this culture doesn't know how to grieve. They have all this frozen grief. So I want to bless the teachers. Um, and there's that ritual space, right, where we really call in the ritual, and that is an altered space where there's
Mhm.
drumming and singing and movement and releasing. Um, the daily practice that I'm still learning how to do is to, see, how do I put it? When you have, I'm sure both of you have had this experience, and I bet a lot of people listening have had the experience of being kind of blown away by a moment in their lives where tears fill your eyes and you're just like in wonder of that moment. Um, to me, that is really a aspect of grief, that life is coming and finding you in a way that you can't deny the power and the beauty, but also the passing of those moments, right? And so I think calling in grief is calling in the wonder and the temporary nature of being human, and the
Mhm.
mundane is like, no, we just go on, right? I pay the bills and I take the kids to soccer and everything just blah 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 blah, and that's absolutely not true. It doesn't always go on. We actually, we don't, we cross. I have this belief that I'm learning from the grief. And, I'll say this, I've done a lot of healing work. I'm a therapist. I've done a lot of different things. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying that when I found the grief and the grief ritual and the sacredness of it, I went, oh, this is the missing piece. And it has become my soul's path because it is the missing piece to healing. We can talk about anxiety, but anxiety is an aspect of grief. We can
Mhm.
talk about depression, but depression is an aspect of grief. So we're just, how do you call it in is the ultimate question. How do you normalize it? And I would say that gratitude slows you down, right? And I love what you said, Ginger, about, we want to accumulate. And the way I often see it also is, we're really obsessed with the light, with ascension. Like, let's
Mhm.
be looking towards the good things in life, and we deem the darkness or going down into the earth as a negative thing. And so, how do we actually honor both, right? That we need them both, because the way I often describe when, like, I'm sitting with someone in my practice and I'm talking to them, well, your brother died last year and this happened and your mom's an alcoholic, and this is all grief. And they go, okay, I get it, but I don't want to go cry in front of a bunch of people, or I don't want to do this or that or this. Um, what I often say to them is, in order to actually allow the depression and allow the all the things that so I'm not wording this right. Let me say it more simply. What I often see is people who are depressed or anxious, to generalize, they don't want to feel the fear, the shame, the anger, the sorrow. They want to feel the light, the joy.
Mhm.
And so but what they're doing is they're pushing down all this humanness. And when you push that down, you push the joy down.
Mhm.
There's no escaping that. But when you actually let the grief and the sorrow out in a beautiful, supportive way, the joy comes with it. And
Mhm.
so whenever I've been really in this sacred place of grief, I open my eyes and the world is alive. Everything, I mean, I
Mhm.
feel the tears coming. It's just beautiful
Mhm.
and wondrous. And that is counterintuitive to this idea of, no, let's just look at the light.
Yeah, I
That
want
is
to
that
jump.
it makes
Yeah,
yeah,
I want to
please.
add to that because I think it's really important what you just said, because I do think that if you think of what really Americans do with grief, it's like when it gets so big, it interrupts our actual life. Like it interrupts our schedule. Like someone
That's right.
dies, and we're like, oh, we got to stop and deal with this. It's, and if daily griefs that we don't, there's just not acknowledged at all. We just keep rolling. And we're
That's right.
taught in the culture to roll through. It's actually, and I'm interested in getting into men's work because I know, especially, with men, it's like, don't just push through, right? Like that's strength.
That's right.
That's an honorable thing to not acknowledge your emotions, like to keep strong and stable in the face of an emotional thing is a strength for the male. And for all Americans, I think too. It's like, the coming from the British, like the stiff upper lip and just keep rolling.
Mhm.
So we are
Mhm.
from our very colonial days, like the people who founded this country, it's kind of drawn in there. Like this is something that's be proud of, that you can
That's
go
right.
on interrupted with productivity and not stop for this stuff. So there's that. But also, I think what you said about again, I'm going to go back to that present moment. It's just like when you drop into the now and we stop the story of production and like the stories of our lives, whatever they are, and we just feel what's happening and we feel our bodies. Yeah, there's just like, I think the field that we're always in is love and grief. I see them as definitely as two sides of the same thing. And they're both very beautiful. Like you said, it's like a natural state of being. And yet we resist them because even I think our threshold for even feeling good is there. Like I don't think a lot of people have a very high threshold for feeling love or for feeling awesome. I think, and we push down grief and the negative feelings there, that threshold gets lower and lower. Like you can't constrict against one without like you have to tighten
That's
everything
right.
up to not feel it and to keep going. And
That's
so
right.
we're trained from a very early age, like in first grade, stop crying, sit down,
That's right.
doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And so these are old muscles reflexing to like, and so you get to these spaces where suddenly the message is opposite, like a grief ritual. And it's like, whoa. I mean, I can see it's very daunting to walk into those spaces because you don't know what's going to come up. We all know, I think, at a level we're holding a lot. But I think having done one myself too, I can just acknowledge that it's very liberating, right? Because what comes up is grief, but also everything else that you haven't been feeling. And a lot of that's good. A lot
That's
of
right.
that's a lot of joy and presence. It's almost psychedelic for me that the how present you can be after you're not holding all this energy. Like you can walk outside and like, whoa, like nature is,
That's right.
I mean, we are just like, the gratitude is just effortless. How grateful it is to be alive when you're not bracing yourself against feeling. So that's my
Uh,
2 cents on that. But I actually am interested in the men's work that you do, Josh, because um maybe you could just talk about like why, like what do men bring to these grief rituals specifically?
um, a whole lot. I will say, the catalyst to do the first few rituals I ever did was I did it with just men. Um, and part of that is because I just have such a tender place for the masculine in this culture, who we're we're taught to not feel basically, except anger. And you see this, the when someone's taught to only only allow certain emotions out, then you can see how all the emotions that they're not giving permission to, how they come out in these really dark ways. The toxic masculine is like a term that's used, and it's really partially because they're not able to grieve and be vulnerable and admit that they're afraid or ashamed. So the first couple we did was men's grief retreats, and you named it really well, which is, and I think it goes for most people in the culture, but you have men who are taught that to be emotionally vulnerable is a weakness, and to be connected to your sorrow is a sign that something is not right. And so there's a lot of pushing down. There's a lot of stiff upper lip. The way I was taught in how I've internalized is you just put your head down, just put your head down and go. And there is some strength and beauty in that at times. But if that is that's at my default setting, well, then I am going to, again, just be pushing down so much of my humanness. And so what I see, and I see this in all, when I participate in grief rituals and other things similar, that a lot of people, but men especially, bring a lot of numbness. They bring a lot of resistance. They know, I mean, I cannot tell you the stories I've heard where men just like list off these griefs that would just crush me. Just like the most heart-wrenching stories, and they just sit there stone-faced. And they're like, I know I need to grieve, but I have no access point. So there's that for sure. And then, I think culturally, and I know, Ginger, you and I have talked about this. We could talk for a long time about just the culture of shame and how it is poison. But men carry that in spades. They just have it. And I haven't met a man in my work that doesn't, if they're being really honest, doesn't, on some level not feel good about who they are. And usually because they feel like they're not being a man, which is that distorted, compartmentalized version of masculinity.
It's very
So,
dehumanizing.
oh, absolutely.
It's deeply dehumanizing.
Absolutely. And so then what I always say is, and I say this to all people when I'm leading these rituals and doing this work, is your point of resistance is that's the threshold, right? That is the crossroads that we need to honor. And so what I love about these rituals and these type of circles is what we really, I say this on these retreats, is what grief asks for is the truth. That's all it asks for. And so people will want to go, I want to cry. Like I've since I was a little boy, I've had access to tears. And as a young man, I had so much shame and I just shoved them down because I saw it as a weakness. And now it is like my superpower. And I'll say to a group of men, if you cry in this circle, that is the most courageous thing you can do, because you've been conditioned that is a sign of weakness. So I have that superpower, and there's not many places in this world now where I'd give a shit if someone sees me cry, because it's just my open heart. But many men will say, I'm angry, I'm shameful, I'm afraid, I'm numb, and then how does the community honor that? It's by welcoming them fully, including, Josh, I don't think you should be doing this, or I think this is stupid. That's also welcomed, right? Because that is the crossroads in which someone's walking. So resistance is the gateway, and it's hard when you want to get to that releasing of energy, the grief, the tears, and you're feeling really numb. I met a man in the Northwest, a beautiful man. And the first time I met him, he said, yeah, I've been coming to these for years and I've never cried, but I keep coming because I know this is the healing ground. And since then I've been with him other times, and he's those emotions have moved through him, but he just trusted in the process, and he had to honor the numbness. So anyway, that's a lot. Yeah.
Do you think that having a grief workshop it's holding space, right, for people to come together and to open up that valve to all of the feelings? Is the grief workshop like a container, or is it like a collaboration?
Well, say more about the collab. What do you mean by collaboration?
Like, because I can imagine, like there's a lot of people that, like in your own practice, it might be, you might have a ritual that you do with just yourself versus doing a ritual with, 15 or 20 people. And so and so obviously, if you're doing any sort of public thing, you having to create a container to hold whatever is going to happen there. Absolutely. And so like as a facilitator, I'm just wondering, okay, when there is a group and there is somebody in it who is, you were saying that edge is where the growth is possible. And when there is a group and there's somebody who's really doubting the work of the group and is really angry about what they're within, like, I don't know. I guess anyway, this is a backwards and forwards thing.
I think I get where you're going. Yeah.
So like,
If someone brings that, like, I think this is stupid. I think you're, doing X, Y, and Z and it's not working. You're asking how do we hold that?
yeah, and just like how versus like being in a group in which everyone is like, I'm ready to dive in.
Right. I've never been at a ritual where everybody's ready to dive in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that
Yeah.
voice of resistance is always speaking to some part of everyone. There's always a part of me that is resisting, like, and I'm glad when someone says, fuck this,
Absolutely.
I don't want to do this, because
Yeah.
it's honoring like the little voice in me that I'm actually not courageous enough to say. But there usually is, because yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's easier to have brunch like than to sit and talk about your grief and what you're really sad about. No, it just
Right.
is.
That's
So,
right.
you know,
And I'll just add that, you know, for me, one of the most sacred things I learned about just being in community and creating safety is, if my authentic truth is welcomed, well, then I start to trust you. And often my first authentic truth is, I don't trust you. I'm resistant to being here. I think this is bullshit. Or a part of me, I would use the language now, a part of me thinks this is bullshit. And if the group goes, yeah, welcome, now I can soften. Now I'm starting to trust. And then someone else goes, yeah, I've been to these before. And I don't know why I'm here. But it's how the container holds that. If it stirs everybody up, I've sat in circles where people want to convince the person that their feeling it's not right. Like, oh no, you should. No, that's the exact opposite of what I would say. I am so grateful you're being that courageous to speak your truth, and that is very welcome. And to be honest, Iris, it's so disarming because they don't know what to do with it. They're like, oh, I'm expecting you to push back or try and convince me or say some sage, wisdom. No, I'm just here to welcome you in this moment. And that to me,
resistance meeting resistance. Like if you push back at that, you're resisting now. So that's just like creating that field. If there's no resistance, and also it allows it to move. And I would say it's unshaming, because as soon as people speak the thing that, feels shameful, like, I don't want to be here, this is stupid. And we're all like, whew, glad you said that, because we're all thinking that too. We were just too scared to say it. We were being too polite. We had our nice girl outfit on, we're not going to say the thing. I think the most powerful part about doing these in community is that it unshames it. That for me, like witnessing this kind of emotion in a container. Because what shame binds, it's like that, it's apathy. Shame and grief together is like, yeah, it's not going to work. It's stupid. I mean, that's where shame grabs onto grief and makes it like, you don't need to do this. Like, it's dumb. Just go home and drink whiskey. You know what I mean? Like, that seems like a cooler idea.
Totally.
But when we come into a circle and everyone's there, like scared, bringing their authentic self, and we start saying these things out loud, like, I'd rather be home drinking whiskey. Not that I want to. I'm just saying, like, if it's one example, then everybody else's shame who might be having a similar thought, like, ooh, yeah, I'd rather be doing something else. It's like we clear it, and then we can be like, okay, we're all human. Yeah, of course, none of us really want to do this hard work. Our brains are putting out energy. We're trusting people we don't know. We're entering work. Anything unfamiliar to the brain. The brain's like, nope, we don't want to do that. That's a risk. But I will say, like, every time I've risked something, risk being vulnerable, risk that's where the biggest rewards and always come in like becoming conscious of my stuff, becoming clearer, becoming more joyful is the risk. And so the risk is showing up. That's all.
100%. Yeah. Go ahead, Iris.
I was just going to say that, like, being like that process of observing and instead of judging that you're speaking of like, of it is that I feel like it's like the detangler, like people that you put conditioner on your hair if you have curly hair to try to get it
Yeah.
detangled. That's like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's like just observing, like helps all those like snarky, like knots kind of get combed out versus
Totally.
that like, oh, we're here to focus on, like when
Yeah.
we had this is a death versus grief kind of grief, but when my close family friends, their daughter died when she was 6.5, and
Mhm.
she was my son's best friend, so we were very close with them, and they just had a celebration of life instead of a funeral, like the week she died, and I could barely stay in my skin. Like it was so uncomfortable, and like all, like there were, 100, I don't know how many people there. Um, and in one aspect, because there were so many children there, like people wanted,
Mhm.
but like versus I wasn't, it was really hard for me. I wasn't at all there, even though like I was grateful for her life, like in a huge, like sobbing my guts out kind of a way. I'm so glad, I still am so glad that I knew that human.
Yeah.
Um, but that kind of like bypassing
Right.
how hard it was to witness both your own grief, but also the grief of that family. Like, I think part of why they just were just going to have this like celebration of life for this tiny, beautiful light was that people just couldn't really hack how
Yeah.
bad they felt. Not, and like how much shame you feel for feeling bad yourself when you know like how much worse her family must be feeling, and like, and so everyone just kind of went along with this idea, and like there was no public space
Mm.
to feel how shitty that felt.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
I do. Yeah.
versus, yeah.
One of my biggest shames, I think, in my life is that a friend lost their son to the ocean. Like he just got swept out to sea and he was
Whoa.
15. And I was really close with this person. We had done a mystery school together and I didn't know what to do. Like I was young, I was in my 20s. I didn't know how to respond. I really didn't have the skills. I didn't have the tools. I felt like I should know how to do it, but I kind of like, I just kind of freaked out. And
Yeah.
I don't think I was there for her the way I wanted to be. And I mean, yeah, it sucked. It sucked all the way around. Like, and I don't know, it's so hard to pick up after that, like after you've kind of dropped the ball that hard. But it's too big. Like, what do you do? What do you say? So I love this idea of being a grief tender because again, it's skills. It's skills not only for your own humanity, but to be to be a community member when really heavy stuff goes down that no one expects and no one knows how to deal with in this culture. To have a little bit of skill set that you can show up and just hold some space for what you just said, Iris, that there needed to be some grief tending going on for no one who in that family knew how to do or had
And no one
access
in
to
our community, and in a way,
and in
like
the
in a
community. Yeah.
community, like I was grateful. I was able to attend a Sabon Fu ritual at Brighton Bush, a few years after that. And that was that was super life changing for me. And just to like, and it was like this huge sample space expander because it's like, oh, you could like be in a room with 60 people with some big ass shit, and there's enough room.
That's right.
There's
That's right.
infinite room for
That's
that.
right.
And it's
That's
not a
right.
hierarchy of pain. It's not like my
No.
pain's bigger than your pain. It's it's
Mm.
it's like, oh, now we're all swimming.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I will say this, both your stories speak to what I experience a lot, which is how do I sit with someone else's sorrow? How
Mhm.
do I welcome it? Right. And
Mm.
and the way that I welcome it is I let that sorrow move through me. Like
Mm.
to hear a six
Mm.
and a half year old, like that breaks my heart. that breaks my heart. And
Mhm.
it's right that it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
That is exactly what it should do,
Yeah.
because I love my son and I know that's my deepest fear. So that's how I hold it. I let it be with me and I don't turn from it. And I feel this love. And clearly those parents loved that child and they were terrified to let that pain in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I hold when someone starts to tell their heartbreaking story. I go, I'm going to feel with you, and I'm not going to let that destroy me, because I know that that's the human. That's my wholeness. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
of course we run from it. The thing I say most in my practice with parents, and I preach to myself all the time, is we suffer when our children suffer. And
Mhm.
then we try to take away their suffering so we don't suffer.
Mhm.
And that's the same thing with grief. You're in pain. Well, now I'm in pain. So, oh, don't, it's okay, honey. It's okay, sweetie. It's okay. It's all right. Everything's gonna. That's not about them. It's about me and me trying
Mhm.
to get rid of it so I don't have to feel. And um, that is a hard road. It's just a hard road to walk as a human. And I refuse to do it. And I had my oh man, here comes the emotion. My best friend from childhood died of cancer last year. And there's so many layers of grief because I lost contact with him. We reconnected when I found out he had cancer. He kept a lot of people at a distance because he just was not wanting to make everything about him having cancer. And so Stephen passed, and his older brother, who was my brother's best friend growing up, is just devastated. So, my commitment to his family, to Stephen, to how do I honor Stephen? To keep showing up for his brother and
Mhm.
calling him, texting him. He's come and visited now. We've gone down and visited him. I reach out to his parents, and it's not about taking away their pain. It's just about being like, hey, I'm here and I love you. And that requires me to feel my pain, right? I miss him
Mhm.
a lot. And I grieve the time we didn't get to spend in our adulthood. And I grieve his children. He's got 2 little boys. Like, it's heart-wrenching. And so I have to hold that as I hold them. And I have to let myself also have my experience, which is heartbreak, and fear, right?
Mhm.
That I'm going to cross too soon. My son's going to be in that situation. That's a lot to hold, right? And so
Yes.
it's a practice. It's a grief tender, because we tend it. And then
Mhm.
we, I say this to Ginger, and I've said it to many people, like, I can't just lead these. I have to go and be held. I have to be part of it too. And even in the ritual, one of the beautiful things, and if people are listening and they're thinking about coming, is that I'm not separate. Ginger's not separate. We sit in the circle. We're part of the village. My broken heart is going to be shared. If the grief is calling me, I go in the ritual space and I grieve. But energetically, I'm holding more than the participants. So I have to go grieve too. And um, the reason I don't call these ritual retreats a workshop is because, for me, often, at least the Western explanation of workshop is you go, you learn something, you get some tools, and then you go home and apply it. You don't go back to the same workshop. But for me, these rituals, this is in the Dogra people, for what I've been explained, this would happen all the time, that someone's heart would be broken. And so they start the drumming and they call in the grief. And it wasn't when someone died, it was when someone was disconnected or someone was feeling left out. It didn't matter. It was calling it in. And it was so normal. And Francis Weller, who's a beautiful therapist and wrote a beautiful book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, about grief and the sacredness of grief. He had the privilege of visiting the Dogra people, and he said he's never met more alive, more happy people. And they're, from the Western world, they're in extreme poverty. There's illness, there's death, all these things that we as Westerns are terrified of. They are so in their joy because they let their grief move. So let me just finish this and say, how do you do that? It's much easier said than done, right? It's a practice. It's a practice. And
I
I'm
also would,
learning.
oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, please.
Well, I'm just saying that when I hear the word I'm holding it for you, I don't think it's holding for me. It's like knowing how to stay grounded in
Wow,
my own self and moving it. Like, you know what I mean? Like crying and feeling
Sure.
it, it's moving. And like, so I can move with you. And so I think that's what changes it for me, is like knowing how to be 1 foot on the ground. So I'm not completely lost in it. Cause I also do think that there's this piece of grief that people over traumatize themselves. Like they
Sure.
get so in it that
Yep.
it actually re-traumatizes them. So there is this way of ritual and community that you are held. Like you don't get so far out there that you actually hurt yourself with the grieving process, and then grief becomes really scary to go back into because it just was so overwhelming. And so I just wanted to offer that out, that there is like a way that as we do grief work ourselves, the tending, we get more comfortable with our own grief, and then we know how to express it so it doesn't scare us, so that we can be present and move. And it's like being next to, I don't know, when you're next to a fire that's burning brightly and you put your little log next to it, like it'll catch, like there's the energetic of people doing the work and moving and being in a way that feels grounded. It teaches us like energetically, just by being in the space, how to do it, where we're feeling it and it feels safe, and it lets us not get, like almost overwrought if it's been a big grief or it's been suppressed for a really long time.
you do you I think that a huge benefit of this is that it may, when you're especially a small community, if you're bringing this energy to this small community, then there is a shared vocabulary of feeling that develops, but that then you will see that person, like I feel like um when my closest friend died suddenly, there was a group of us that all had children the same age, and we were very close, and we saw each other regularly, and it felt it our time together was not all about like what Ginger said. We weren't like spending all of our time together crying about our shared loss. We could be fully human. But then when you saw people outside of that shared vocabulary of feeling, they were like, how are you doing? And it's just like, I'm at the fucking grocery store. I don't really want to process right now with you that I don't even know that well, And so it's like, I think it, especially in our society that doesn't have kind of some shared understanding on how to process through big loss, doing a ritual like this with others can provide you with some like trellising and support that is beyond words. So it's like you see them, it's like, yes, like
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I know you got to go, Josh. Do you want to end up with any final thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking of something and I kind of lost it. Let me sit here.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. That's no, it's not your fault. It's my old brain.
Well, as you're thinking, let me just talk about this date that we're having this. So, just so if you're listening, this sounds interesting to you, it is on my website. So northfork53.com, click on the events tab. It'll take you to this grief ritual. And it talks a lot about there. There's some videos on there from like Francis Weller, who wrote The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Melodoma, and Sobo Fusame have videos on that little link. So you could watch all that and listen to it. All the details are there. It's going to be the weekend of the 11th through the 13th. Starts on a Friday afternoon, ends on a Sunday afternoon. And we make all the meals. And so you can just come in. It's a pretty solid container for the weekend. And yeah, we've got space. We're going to go up to like 25 people total, I think. So it'll be a fairly small container. But I believe the intention is to try to make it an annual event. We'll see how this one goes. But it would be a beautiful thing to have something that once you understand this magic that, you can come back to and you can bring people to and know that it's happening. And we're going to do it in the spring, but we decided the fall is definitely the right energetic time for honoring loss as nature starts to churn inward. So yeah, Josh, I'll let you close it. Have you got your thought?
No, but I'll just say some stuff. I'm
say some stuff.
I'll just start with the gratitude for this conversation. It's just beautiful. I feel so honored and humbled to just be in this life and get to talk about these the realness of being human. You know, I just feel it. I feel it very deeply right now. So I'm feeling that. And I'm feeling really honored and humbled to come up to Nehalem and sit with some beautiful people and honor their fullness, right? Honor the fullness of life. And I would say that for people who are maybe thinking about this and I don't know, I what I want to say a few minutes before is and I'll try and keep this brief. So I am a therapist. I sit with people one-on-one, and there's a power in that, right? There's an intimacy and a connection. And inevitably I get to a relationship with someone where I go, now it's time for you to be in community, because the community is going to heal and hold in a way that I never can. We are supposed to be in community. And I'm talking authentic, open-hearted, truth-speaking communities. And that is what we call in these retreats, is the community healing. That one-on-one, it just doesn't have the same power, right? And one-on-one has a very beautiful power, but it's different. And then we take a step even larger to, you know, the realm of the spiritual or ritual ceremony. And, you know, what I do is my practice is to really be in relationship to the earth in a sacred way, and then to be in relationship to the ancestors in a sacred way. And so calling those in as part of the ritual, and that's in the lineage of Malidoma and Sabomfu, and many other, you know, indigenous wisdom knows that truth, and that heals in a very beautiful, powerful way that is way beyond my understanding. But I just humbly call it in and ask others to hold that. And so we're really calling in the community, and then that deeper healing that goes beyond, you know, language, and it goes beyond the Western psyche. And so that's, I don't know if that's a sales pitch or not, but that's what really we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the invitation. That's the invitation. I'm feeling called to ask you guys, do we want to do more podcasts, like on maybe the 5 gates of grief that Francis Weller talks about? Because I do feel like when we talk about nurture culture, those are hitting like all the points of maybe what we're grieving in terms of this culture that we're trying to create this new dynamic. So
I'm very open. I love this. Okay. You guys are awesome. So I'm happy. I'm happy to talk more. Yeah.
I like so grateful you came. Yeah, so grateful for you, Josh. Thank you. Love you very much, my cousin. And it's just also going to be very special for me, just on a personal note, to have you and I and Jamie, our other cousin, and my sister Sally, who's my oldest sister, is going to be here. That's 4 of us in the same ritual, which I've never done that. Like, I've never been in ritual with my family. We are shared ancestry here, so our ancestors are going to show up like we get 4 for 1.
Oh, that's
I think that's really cool. I think it's really
very
cool.
Special. It'll
Very
be very special.
I think, I mean, for sure, like, this is, we just had Indigo Fest, and we had 4 sets of, there was a mother and daughter, 3 sets of mother daughters, and a granddaughter nice. That came. So of the like 40 people, there were 8 of them that were very close kin. Nice. And then there were some friend groups and things and partners and stuff too. But I think that just starts the level of intimacy of the group. It's just like, it's instead of starting at 0, you're starting at whatever.
Yeah,
like
cool.
Energetically, when you have people that deeply love each other and know each other deeply, it uplifts the whole group. It makes it so. That's super exciting, actually.
It's special. It's very special.
It's very special.
Oh my gosh.
Love you all. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm gonna be the one kind of poking at these 2 to come back on and do a little bit more grief talk before this October 11th date. So hopefully we'll have more coming for you. But until then, thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Josh. Love you, Iris. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll talk again.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
That was great.